Hi, I'm Alvina Ling.
And I'm Grace Lynn.
And we're book friends
forever!
We're childhood friends
who grew up to be
a children's book editor
and an author and illustrator.
Welcome to Book Friends Forever. This is the Minnesota Editors with Hinz and Andrew Karre episode. So, as our listeners may know, Grace is off on her China trip. So I have two, not one, but two special guests joining me today. Carol and Andrew, thank you for being here.
Okay, so
Carol is associate publisher of Millbrook Press and Carolrhoda Books at Lerner Publishing Group. Carol, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more for our audience?
Sure. So I've been a children's book editor for just over 25 years now, with most of my career at Lerner. And my focus these days is on picture books and nonfiction, both illustrated and some with photos.
Great. Thanks for being here. And I just saw you at Kindling Words a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
Andrew Karre is Senior Executive Editor at Dutton Books for Young Readers, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. Andrew, could you introduce yourself a little bit more for our audience?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I have been in publishing my whole working life, so more than 25 years at this point in children's literature since 2003 or 4, I guess. I've been at Penguin Random House now for a little over 11 years. I publish primarily young adult and middle grade fiction and nonfiction. And recently I find myself also publishing a couple of adult books. So it's been a real journey. But I am a children's book lifer.
Yes. And I feel like the last time I saw you was at some SCBWI conference over 10 years ago, maybe. I don't know. But I do remember you gave an amazing talk about diversity in children's books that I still think about. So thanks for that. Do you remember where that was? I don't know.
Man.
Yeah.
10 years ago is so long.
I know.
I do have a bonus fun fact, which is that Andrew and I also went to college together.
That
not realizing that although we were both English majors, we didn't have any idea that, our paths would intersect in the way that they do as, adults with jobs.
Connections are
True
fun.
fact. Yes. Yeah. And that I too worked at Lerner for from 2008 until the end of 2014, which is why I can very easily say Carolrhoda, because I was the editorial director of Carolrhoda in that period. Carolrhoda.
Carolrhoda.
So yes, Carol and I had the distinct pleasure of being colleagues and office or floor mates for those very fun 6 years in downtown Minneapolis, which was the last time I was ever working in an office. Probably something I'll never do again, because I'm no longer that civilized.
Yes, you get comfortable, I think. Well, okay. So Carol knows, because Carol, you are a day one listener of the Book Friends Forever podcast, right? So you know that we always start with catching up with each other's lives. So I want to know, Carol, how have you been since I last saw you at Kindling Words?
Absolutely. I feel like it's this sort of return to reality. I just barely escaped the storms that hit the East Coast. So I felt very lucky. Getting back to just the day-to-day, okay, what needs to happen? Editing, we have sell sheet copy we're working on, that usual stuff, juggling it with being a parent of a 12-year-old and 15-year-old, where I am also in the role of homework coach. And I have relearned sine, cosine, and tangent this week.
Oh,
if
wow.
you have any burning questions. And then just, the usual life stuff. I had my colonoscopy yesterday.
So now you're eating more.
Exactly. So, important, which I partially mentioned because my mother was diagnosed with colon cancer at age 44 and has been a real advocate for, doing your preventative care and taking care of those things, even when they don't sound like the most fun way to spend your day.
Wow. Yes. No, that's very important for sure. Andrew, how have you been in the last couple I'd just say weeks.
Yeah, great. I'm co-signing the colonoscopy thing. It's the best nap you'll ever have. Extremely restful. You should totally do it. I've been traveling actually this whole week, which is why I'm in Baltimore. I was invited to participate in a panel at AWP, and in my several months ago, wisdom thought, oh, I'll just sort of tag a New York stop onto that. So I showed up in New York when it was actually relatively cold on Sunday night, and did a whole bunch of meetings with colleagues in town, which was fun. I used to go to New York very regularly. Now I've been twice in the last 6 years because the pandemic sort of changed all those rhythms. But it was nice to see a lot of colleagues. I got to have a few days with a good author friend. But I am fundamentally a creature of routines and homebound habits, and I am really looking forward to going home very early tomorrow morning. So
Can
be good to
you
be back in Minnesota.
define AWP for our listeners?
Yes, sorry. AWP is a conference focused largely on post-secondary writing programs, so MFAs and things like that. So all of the big writing MFAs are here. Plus, it is my understanding, at least, is the gathering place for independent presses, small presses, your Copper Canyons, your Gray Wolves. So at the moment, the concentration of poets and short story writers in Baltimore is extremely high, which I find lovely.
That is, I've never been, probably because, I think probably
There's really no
Big
children's
Five doesn't
literature
go.
here.
Ah,
No.
aw. Well, that is
But
also a reason.
it was relevant to our lives. The reason they invited me was to moderate a panel with Evie Zuboy, Melinda Lowe, and Mahogany Brown about book banning, which I took as a nice sign that this cohort of people, which may have less intense interest in book banning than we have, is starting to pay attention, and I'm all for that. So we had a pretty well attended session yesterday with people talking about book bans, and those three are extremely good public speakers. I just tried to get out of their way.
That sounds great. I don't suppose it was recorded, and
It was actually. So I'm not sure what AWP does with those recordings, but there was definitely a camera.
Interesting. Well, maybe it'll show up on YouTube at some point.
Yes, if I find it, you can I'll send you the link and you can put it in the show notes.
Great. Okay, so as for me, I've been also really busy with I don't know, I feel like it's been nonstop since Kindling Words. I forgot that I had committed to have either of you done the Writing Barn conference or virtual conference? I signed up to do the virtual conference just this past weekend, and I think I thought there were 2 weeks in between Kindling Words and that, and alas, there was not. So I was scrambling to do critiques and and prepare, but it was fun. And it's also our sales conference week this week. Our sales for us, I don't know for the two of you, we had changed it maybe now, I don't know how long ago because of the pandemic. And I think it was maybe around the pandemic, we changed our sales conference so editors no longer present at sales conference. It's all marketing publicity. So for me, it's very relaxed. I get to just watch how, my amazing colleagues present the books, which is really fun. But I do, we had a cocktail party. It was an in-person sales conference, which we are now doing once a year. So all of the reps were in New York, and it was great to hang out with them and meet some people that I hadn't met in person yet. So that was great. But I just feel like it's kind of been like a nonstop, just work-related social outings, including the Australian contingent was in town, and they come into town I think it's every year, but I think the children's group comes every other year. So I saw them 2 years ago, and so that was fun. But
PRH had sales conference this week too. That's the meetings I was at. So we had our
right.
Australian contingent was in New York too.
Oh,
that
that's
was
fun.
the first in-person PRH sales conference I've ever been to. It was nice. Very different from ones I remember from pre-pandemic times at Learner, but it was. I hadn't reps I have known only as email addresses. I finally met in person. It was really nice.
Yeah, that is always really nice. And I feel like some reps I had seen on screen, but yes, as we all discovered after the pandemic, when you see someone in person, it just feels really, really different. All right. So you are both here today. In part, actually, Carol, we were in Kindling Words. We were talking about the goings on in Minnesota, and you know that Grace and I have talked about that over the last few months. Um, and you are both based in Minnesota, and so we thought this is a good opportunity to talk about what's happening in Minnesota right now. First, I guess, are you both from Minnesota? How long have you lived in Minnesota, and where do you both live now? Andrew, why don't you start?
I'm not from Minnesota. I grew up in Michigan. I went to college in Wisconsin, as mentioned with Carol, and I chased my wife, my now wife, then girlfriend, from the Wisconsin to her home in in St. Paul 26 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Um, for my first publishing internship in Minnesota in 2000. So I chose Minnesota. I live in St. Paul, have always lived in St. Paul. I guess one summer I spent 3 months living in Minneapolis, but otherwise I am purebred St. Paul now. And at this point, over half my life spent living in Minnesota. So I am a comprehensive Midwesterner, but I didn't grow up in Minnesota.
How about you, Carol?
I did grow up in Minnesota. I grew up in a suburb of St. Paul, where my mom worked for the local school district, and so have always felt a deep connection to Minnesota. But then, college in Wisconsin with Andrew, and then I did work in publishing in New York for about 3 years, starting in 2000, and just couldn't fathom sort of raising kids and working in publishing in New York. I knew people did it, but it seemed very daunting. So met my husband, who's from Iowa, but was also in New York, moved back to Minnesota, and we are in St. Anthony Village, which is just outside of Minneapolis. Like it's a 4 block walk to get into Minneapolis from my house. But we do have our own school district, which I think will come up as we talk about, what's been happening with ICE and how we've been affected.
Well, do you want to start then? How have you been affected by ICE's presence in Minnesota?
Sure. So I think there's sort of the general, like, existential dread and horror at seeing everything play out, which sort of, was a blanket of effect on everyone. And that was really part of the point,
Yeah.
to really just stop all, normal life and normal reactions, make it feel like a crisis, because it did. At the same time, because of where I am, in some ways, there were not as many direct effects. So I did not encounter ICE in my neighborhood, although I did encounter our police were just out. Like anytime I walked my dog, there would be at least one patrol car going by. That's partly because St. Anthony's is very small. And so the part of the community response here was to have the police out. The schools requested them to be nearby at arrival and dismissal, folks out in their vests, who are still out. So this probably started in December with the people out to make sure students are safe at arrival and dismissal, and that is continuing. This is March 6th today, and I was by the school this morning, and they're still out there. But then there's the sort of navigating all these questions that you didn't expect to ever have to navigate. What is safe for me? We had some really great support from our publisher and others at Learner in terms of messaging about, make the decisions you need to make for what is safe. If that means working from home, that's completely fine, which I thought was really lovely, just to have that sort of support that, like, we understand this is scary and upsetting. We want you to prioritize your safety. There is now sort of an ICE policy. Here are the people who are authorized to communicate should an ICE agent show up. We have no public areas in our building, but that was not something I had thought about 3 months ago.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then,
truly.
what is safe for my kids? What about their friends? Because it was so, there's nothing nuanced about the presence of ICE. So, like, okay, my teenage son has a friend who could drive, but because of her heritage and what she looks like, her mom said, no, you cannot drive. And it was about a month and a half she couldn't drive. So if they wanted to hang out, it had to be at our house. They couldn't be out going to thrift stores or fast food or whatever. And I would go pick them up from school, bring them here, and then we would bring the friend home, or one of her parents would come. But you're navigating safety in a whole different way, and then you're sort of figuring out how you are going to respond, which I can maybe save for sort of step 2, so Andrew can get into what his experiences have been like.
Sure, yeah. So the part of St. Paul I live in, I live fairly centrally in the city. I encountered ICE personally a few times. I witnessed 2 kidnappings, not looking for them necessarily. They just happened as I was going around, and you would see. You felt the presence constantly. That sort of it really does for those 2 months, particularly when they were here in tremendous force. And I agree completely with Carol. It was quite intentional. It was just hard to find room to think about other things. You noticed the helicopters all the time. You became very, very, very aware of license plates because there was a certain pattern to the way ICE drove. That Target where Greg Bavino preened around after using their bathroom, that's the Target we would go to when we still shopped at Target. It's different now, but I still feel the effects sort of psychically of that period. I'm a person who generally, we go to a lot of, when there are protests, we go to them. That's just sort of part of our family culture, and part of that is it's all. I really felt it in these past few months. If you're not able to see the real thing, you start to feel like you're going crazy because it's all over social media. You're seeing pictures, but like I did not personally see it. So quite honestly, a few times we went to the Whipple building, which is, as many people know, the federal facility in South Minneapolis. It's sort of the main ICE staging area and the place through which kidnapped victims were processed. And for the first first few weeks, you could reliably go to the Whipple building and participate in a peaceful protest where you would see ICE there 100%, and you would be able to yell at them. And honestly, that felt really good because you kind of made contact, and like it was almost cathartic. Into February, that became a little bit more dangerous. The pushback there was much stronger. It didn't feel safe to go to Whipple, so I stopped going to that. But then by then they had killed 2 people, so there were lots of memorials you could go to. I didn't know Alex Preddy at all, but the cycling community in Minnesota is very, very close and large. And I've been a year-round cyclist in Minnesota the whole time I've lived here. Like we shopped at I certainly encountered him on bike rides. There's just no doubt in my mind. We shopped at the same bike shop, the bike shop that organized the big mass protest. So obviously it's terrible when anybody's killed, but I mean, he was a little younger than I am, and in many of the same circles going to protests, holding up, like he was doing things that I have done, and he died doing it. And I can't ever shake that. It's just sort of constantly in my consciousness that like these people are dead, and nothing has happened. And given all the other traumas that the Twin Cities have gone through over the last few years, it in some ways, like at the beginning of this, okay, we do know how to come together, but this was so much worse. At least it felt that way to me, because there's been no even hints of justice. The occupation is and continues to be so pervasive. And then I'll wrap up. But the last few weeks, when there have been fewer of the sort of what we came to know as ICE style kidnappings, where they rolled into a neighborhood with a couple of vehicles and would, surround people. Those don't happen as much anymore as they did, because there's less of a presence. But now there's just this sense that we're being surveilled. For one weekend in my neighborhood, at least, there were a lot of unmarked cars with one person sitting in them, idling on corners, for no reason. Like maybe we were crazy, maybe we were being paranoid, but occasionally you would sort of work up the courage to go knock on a window and ask, hey, what are you doing here? Like you've been sitting idling in this parking lot for hours. Like it's 55 degrees. It's a warm, like, why are you just sitting here with your car running? And they would either just sort of, drive off and show up somewhere else, or they would say nonsense like, I'm FBI and I'm here investigating child pornography.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
and it just makes you feel paranoid and crazy, but also you have reason to doubt. I don't like being, it's not in it's not in, I think, any Midwesterner's nature to go up to a parked car and just ask, hey, why are you
Right.
here? Like that's not something I would have done, but it felt important to me because I'm a middle-aged white guy, and there is a certain safety that I have in doing that other people don't feel. So if I can at least do one thing, I can go just, hey, we see you. What's going on here? So I
Mhm.
did that, as uncomfortable as it was. I mean, one of them was parked in front of, like, just like the sort of pattern mashing that happens. Like one of those cars was parked in front of Mischief, which is the toy store in St. Paul that got a little bit of attention nationally because they were selling ice out signs and immediately got this weird audit from for compliance. And it's just 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday. There's a unmarked car just idling in front of them. Guy sitting in there for hours.
So creepy.
Anyway, very
Wow.
creepy is the right word. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was wondering, I feel like from my point of view, in New York City, there was a ton of coverage leading up and like directly after the murders of both Renee Good and Alex Preddy. And I feel like, they announced that they were pulling back, and I just feel like there hasn't been as much coverage, and I was kind of curious what the state of things are currently. So Andrew, you did answer that to an extent. Carol, is there anything you would add?
Yeah, I would say what I've been hearing lately, and partly local news coverage, which has been really strong, especially Minnesota Public Radio and the Minnesota Star Tribune have had just really consistently good coverage. And then we also have resources like the Sahan Journal, which has covered the immigrant communities here for a long time. So what I've heard is that more in what we call outstate Minnesota, so communities like Shakopee and Red Wing are still seeing ICE. I was talking with a woman at my church last Sunday, and she had seen an ICE vehicle on her way to church in the suburb of St. Paul, where I grew up. I did some looking into numbers because I was curious, and before this whole Operation Metro Surge, there are about 150 Border Patrol agents stationed in the state. At the peak, there were 3,000 federal agents here. And then currently, it seems very unclear. So Kristi Noem at the beginning of the week said there were 650 agents, which is still a lot. And then after that, Tom Holman told Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, no, it is more like the pre-surge levels. So now I don't believe anybody.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah. That not believing is just become reflexive now. Like these people lie constantly.
right.
I don't think they know. I don't think there's yeah, but it does feel like there's probably less, but I like the number should be zero. Like I am
Yeah.
I have no, like, DHS should be abolished. I have no patience. Like the quickest way to spike my blood pressure is somebody mentions like reforming. Like I have shoes older than the Department of Homeland Security. Like this is not a like this is nothing. This is an agency that happened not just in our lifetimes, but in our adulthoods. It can
Mhm.
go. It should go. It should go.
Yeah, I agree. Um, so I mean, I have to say I mean, well, thank you for both for sharing your experiences, and it felt very visceral to me. And then from the outside, I mean, I think, we're all in awe with how the Minnesotans were responding to all of this. Why do you think Minnesota was targeted so heavily, and why do you think the Minnesotans have responded in the way that they have?
I've seen sort of so many different things on social media from various sources speculating as to why. And I think the ones that seem most logical to me are sort of the fraud making news, which is not that this is something unique to Minnesota. And this fraud was already being investigated and prosecuted. So like the logical connection is that not there at all, but I think that got on the national radar. And then conservative right-wing YouTuber Nick Shirley posted a video on December 26th where he was supposedly investigating fraud with Somali-run daycares and then showing up at places and asking to see the children and then saying because he didn't see children there must be fraud. And it's like, what daycare would ever let a random guy see the children in their care? Like, absolutely absurd. And I think that really went viral, got on the radar of Trump because the surge started in early December, but then this Nick Shirley thing seemed to, really pour gasoline on the whole situation. And then I think also the fact that, Tim Walz, our governor, was Kamala Harris's running mate. We know that Trump holds grudges and is very, emotional in responding to them. None of which has to do with any of ICE's actual activities here. The whole they did nothing that had anything to do with fraud, certainly,
No.
and
Well,
we're just
I mean,
terrorizing large swaths.
Tangentially, they did because all of the prosecutors responsible for investigating fraud no longer work as AUSAs in Minnesota because they were tasked with investigating Renee Good's spouse, and they resigned. Like, we don't have a functioning federal DOJ apparatus in Minnesota any longer because of the surge. Like, we went from having hundreds of federal attorneys doing the normal work of federal prosecution in Minnesota, and they're gone, which is why you have this whole one of like a steady drumbeat of coverage of the various contempt of court proceedings against volunteer AUSAs trying to deal with the habeas petitions that they're overwhelmed with from the people they've kidnapped. So if one were interested in proper prosecution of whatever amount of fraud there was, and the scale of it has been largely exaggerated, it's now gone. Like that investigation has been hopelessly compromised by the Trump administration, which is just bonkers. And I agree with everything Carol said about the reason. I would add that there's a significant amount of anti-Black racism involved in it too, though, because Donald Trump has targeted Somali people very specifically. Like, what he calls Ilhan Omar is just appalling. They lie just reflexively about voter fraud for which there is no evidence. Ilhan Omar, to be clear, represents a majority white district. Like, the vast majority of people who vote for Ilhan Omar are white people. And the vast majority of Somalis in Minnesota are either citizens or are here with complete legal status. There are, if your goal was deportation of people here without status, without legal status, you would be a fool to target Somali people. There just aren't that many. But if you are what Donald Trump has been for many decades, dating back to the Central Park Five and his call for people who did not commit crimes to be executed, Black people, an anti-Black racist, this all makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And then, what is special about Minnesotans? I mean, they seem very special to me. You seem like a hearty bunch. I mentioned my husband went to McAllister, and he was, like, we actually bought a Minnesota state flag that's hanging up in our basement right now, the new one.
But,
the good one.
Lovely.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, what is it? What is it about Minnesota?
I think it's a bunch of factors. Some of it goes back to what Andrew was mentioning earlier about the previous things we've been through. So sort of in my community, it was a police officer from our police department who shot and killed Philando Castile. And that brought out, a local response, both in my community and, across the metro area that affected Andrew as well, because Philando worked at the school
I
that
met
his kids go
Philando
to.
Castile. Philando
Mm,
Castile worked in my children's elementary school. Like
wow.
there's a kind of hyper weird, hyper local quality to these traumas that has had a lasting effect and maybe made us a little bit more like ready. But I think there's also like doing this in like it's very memeable and I'm here for all the memes, but doing this in Minnesota in winter, like for all
Yeah.
the sort of Stalingrad things, we do take a lot of pride in our ability to not only cope with winter but to thrive in winter. Um, so like I did feel like the weather was on our side, like when
Yeah.
speaking of YouTubers, like when the January 6th rioter and right-wing influencer Jake Lang came to town twice. Um, like if if he had not been picked up in that car by a trans person, I mean, like God, the university is just crazy. The universe is just crazy sometimes. Like to drive him out, I suspect he would have had severe frostbite. Like they're just like these people come to our community and are not like prepared for our weather, and they're trying to, like trying to kidnap and harm our neighbors. Like in this period where Minnesotans take care of each other, like
Mhm.
I saw this joke on social media so many times, like of ice vehicles getting stuck and not being able to get themselves out of the snow. That doesn't happen to Minnesotans, not
Mhm.
because we don't get stuck, but because if you get stuck, all of a sudden five Minnesotans appear from nowhere to get you
Right.
out. It's a
Right.
point of pride. If you see a car spinning its wheels, like you
Mhm.
come out and you help. There's this, like, that's how you get through a super snowy winter when it's going to be -20 for weeks on end. Um, and to come here and try and disrupt this community while we are all in that, like, we're all in it together spirit,
Mm.
it felt so enraging and so specifically anti-Minnesotan that I think that probably helped amplify some of the, you know, rage and wanting to be neighborly.
Yeah. And it did really feel like, these are our neighbors being attacked in this very collective spirit. And, there is a long history of Minnesota welcoming refugees and immigrants. And that's not to say these folks necessarily have had an easy time of it. I want to acknowledge both that, it can be a struggle to make your way it for a lot of these communities, and thinking of Hmong Americans, where the first people started coming in 1975. So here we are 50 years later. Andrew and I are both fortunate enough to work with a local Hmong American author, Kao Kalia Yang, who's phenomenal. And she's also one of the very first Hmong writers to be published in the literary space. So, it's taking decades and decades for these voices to reach a larger audience and reach more prominence.
There's a I think actual Minnesotans are sort of rightly sensitive to the kind of perception of Minnesota being this sort of homogeneously white Scandinavian kind of Garrison Keillor caricature place. And we, as Carol says, nothing about this place is sort of perfect. I wouldn't want to make that assertion at all. But I think we're rightly sensitive to being sort of presented as this sort of white American, middle American thing that's been invaded. Like no, Kaukalia Yang is as an important and a Minnesota voice as Garrison Keillor, who doesn't
Mhm.
even live here anymore.
Mhm.
Like there's this is Minnesota. These neighbors that they are
Mhm.
trying to kidnap, nobody here perceives them as invaders. Nobody, they perceive them as neighbors. These are Minnesotans they're trying to take away. And it feels extremely personal.
Yeah. So, if listeners want to do something to help, what would you suggest?
I've got a few suggestions. First of all, Stand with Minnesota is a fantastic website created by Ashley Fairbanks and another woman. And Ashley's a Minnesotan who lives in Texas, which I think
Mm.
shows you that you don't have to be on the ground to do something really powerful and really helpful.
Yes,
And
yeah, that's a
then
fantastic website.
yeah,
Great.
resources and ways to help there, including if you can't make a financial contribution, there's a spot for write a love letter to Minnesotans.
Aw.
It's just delightful.
Yeah.
And then I think, people should be thinking about what they can do locally. Attend a legal observer training, no matter where you live, whether through a local organization or through an online resource, just to help yourself become more educated, more aware, and then connect with local organizations who are helping immigrant communities, and just connect with your neighbors if you don't already know them super well, because those community ties are going to serve you really well, whether ICE shows up on your doorstep or it's some other crisis that you need to navigate.
Yeah,
That's
doing the trainings is a really good point, because there's some of the at the height of the sort of federal pushback trying to characterize the surge as or the resistance in Minnesota as like paid agitators, or this sort of secretive cabal of people who were trying to dox ICE agents. Like, these were normal people who had never used Signal before in their life, who had not got, like, if one of the legacies of the occupation of Minnesota is that people just, as a matter of routine, take these observer trainings and become prepared for what to do when they come to your community. It normalizes this behavior. I think it sounds ridiculous when they say over and over again that there are paid protesters and these are outside agitators, but they've been saying it over and over again for years. So there's clearly an audience for this. If we can make that messaging sound as ridiculous to regular people as it does to people in Minnesota now, that's only to the good. And it's like, this training is maybe makes it sound more complicated than it is. It's a refresher course on things that you learned about the Constitution a long time ago, and some very basic kinds of things, but it comes in handy, and you'll meet people in your community, and it does sort of like foster that sense of, okay, this is what I can do as a regular person, and maybe you'll never need it, or maybe you'll really need it, but it's an hour really well spent.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
And I think one other thing I would say is, like, if you get a chance, like, we're going to have confirmation hearings presumably for Mark Wayne Mullen to replace Kristi Noem. I call your representatives. Like, I know that we won't get all Senate Democrats to vote no on this, because John Fetterman has already said he's a yay, but I want, like, if you want to help Minnesota, make sure that Mark Wayne Mullen knows if he takes this job, he's going to be miserable. That running DHS is the worst job in the world. That the only questions are, when will the 3 people who murdered Minnesotans be sent back to Minnesota for justice, and what are you going to do to wind down DHS? We should just be absolutely relentless about this. There's no turning the page, and that's something where calling your reps. I can only imagine if you're a senator in California, and all of a sudden your constituents are calling you about Minnesota. That's got to matter a little bit. So that, like, making those calls, engaging locally, like getting out in front of this, that helps Minnesota too.
Great. All right. Well, before we move on to our next segment, I just want to know, like, how are you both doing and coping? And do you have any tips on how to be okay when the world is not? Looks like Carol might be frozen. So Andrew,
I don't know if I have any tips.
Yeah.
She's back. Good. I don't know how well I coped. I'm still coping. It was really, I mean, to be quite honest, and I think all the authors who work with me know this, because they helped me cope, to be honest. It's like, I was not super productive for those 2 months, and maybe I'm not going to be super productive for a little while ahead. I mean, I did my job, but it was really, really hard to concentrate. And I was anxious all the time. But I tried to give my, like, if I don't know if this is advice, but when it comes to, like, I guess you have to give yourself permission to do the things that feel like you're helping. Like, it was really important to me to be able to be outside and sign up for some of those shifts patrolling, because it felt like something I could do and I could bear witness. I'm reasonably good with a camera, and spent a lot of like, all right, if I can be there and make video and I have a social media platform, I can share things. So that was important to me, and I gave myself permission to drop everything. If there was something happening and I could go, I would go. Um, but my wife was equally active, but in completely different ways. It basically became her full-time job to help organize patrols and mutual aid for some St. Paul schools that are less well resourced than our school community, because that was one of the really inspiring things that happened here, was a redistribution of resources. The super well resourced communities would notice, like, okay, we've got 7 people on every corner, like outside at school at dismissal. This is probably excessive. And then other schools didn't, and it required a lot hours and hours and hours of work on Signal to redistribute those resources. And that's what she did. And it wasn't out like, it doesn't involve a whistle or a vest, but it was every bit as important. And like, find the thing that you can do so that when you feel helpless and filled with rage, like, at least I can go and put some work in.
That's great advice. Carol.
Absolutely. Well, I'm stealing tips from Jeanette Bradley from her fabulous presentation at Kindling Words, which was focused on how she was involved in fighting book bans in Rhode Island. But she had these great kernels of advice that kind of apply to myriad situations. So one was just pick a focus. So just echoing what Andrew said, you don't have to do all the things. So pick something that feels aligned with your skills, your abilities, your resources, and then connect with other people who share that focus so you can work together. So this may be looking at existing organizations or just other individuals in your community. And sort of think of it as a relay rather than a sprint. So you're doing parts, but you're also, taking breaks, getting a chance to recover. I will say, in early January, everything felt like a mess. It felt like it was on fire. And I was likewise struggling to get much of anything done. I found that if something had an immediate deadline, this book goes to the printer next week. Okay, I can accomplish that. But, like a larger, I need to conceptually figure out where I want to go with this edit. It's like the brain wasn't there.
Yeah.
Impossible.
So
It would have been malpractice to try and do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I know. Am I serving the author with my fragmented notes? No. And then the other really interesting thing Jeanette brought up that I hadn't heard elsewhere, she said that in the military, soldiers will be assigned to play Tetris for 15 minutes. And that sort of we process trauma visually, which makes sense for an illustrator to be teaching this to all of us. And that part of resetting our brain, if you are doing something visual that requires your immediate attention and thought, that can help you come back to a more regulated state. Because I found myself playing this hilarious game on a website I only know about from my kids that they go to when they're supposed to be doing schoolwork and aren't, called coolmathgames.com.
Oh my
which
God.
Let me tell you, there's not any real math on that website.
Nope.
Oh, yes.
But
I've heard about this.
This
It's a
game
phenomenon.
called Suika that is, I think, from Nintendo Switch, and you're like combining different fruits to form larger fruits. And it's like, why do I keep playing this? And then I heard Jeanette, I was like, I'm not crazy. I'm actually doing something therapeutic, as long as, you're not spending the day on it. But as a 15-minute practice, it has value.
Yeah. That's really good advice, and I didn't even know. I guess that's why there was a period in January where I was organizing my photo archive very intensely for hours on the weekend.
Yeah.
It was extremely visual. These were early photos of our children, and it was just like, this is kind of all I want to do. Like, it was like a little window into a different time, but it was also intensely visual, and
Yeah.
fussy,
Yeah,
That's
you
and that felt
needed
good.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, all great advice, and thank you so much. Both, I mean, I found this discussion very therapeutic and also very
Well,
informative.
I want to say too, so,
Mhm.
on that score, because this is in continuing in that, and I want to name it. It's like it's been really great working in this field. How many people have checked in?
Mm.
Like
Yes.
we're like Carol and I both work with authors all over the world, and the number of calls and just people I haven't talked to in years, just sort of reaching out and asking how I'm doing, what they can do. I know we can't take that for granted in every industry, but at least in our industry, like I was reasonably sure people were wonderful. And one really great silver lining is that this 2 month period has confirmed that my colleagues, the authors we get to work with, the creators we get to work with, are genuinely wonderful people. And
Yeah,
that's made a really big difference. Everyone who's just a little check-in, you know, it's meant the
yeah,
world.
it's a
Yeah.
great community. Yeah,
Well, and
that's
even,
definitely
listening
true.
to Book Friends Forever, which I often do on the weekend while I'm washing dishes, and just hearing, oh, Alvina and Grace are talking about us. They're talking about Minnesota. Like, you didn't have to do that. It's not a part of the direct mission of the podcast, but just knowing people care and people are talking about it and spreading the
Yeah.
word, that was really heartening.
Oh, well, I'm glad. I mean, but I mean, it was all consuming even for those of us who are outside of Minnesota. So. All right, so we're going to move on to our fortune cookie segment, which is basically a little fun bonus segment. But I thought since all three of us are editors, this would just be a fun opportunity to just talk about a little bit about editing. I mentioned I did the Writing Barn virtual conference, and one of the topics, and you're supposed to do it in 6 words, which we don't have to do here, but was like, what is your most common margin note when you edit, which I thought was fun. And I'll just start with one of mine, which was echoed by one of the other editors there, is just simply cut question mark. In fact, like Peter Brown once shared, I guess he does a presentation and he'll sometimes share an edit, but I think on the page, I think my only edit was like I had highlighted something and said cut question mark. And I was like, that's what you're sharing? Anyway, what Andrew, what is your
Hmm.
one of some of your more common margin notes?
Um, I'm sure authors could will correct me if this isn't true, but I think I use the word perhaps quite a lot. So
Hmm.
definitely perhaps cut. Or
I
are
might have
you
to adjust
perhaps
mine.
clicking like yeah, are you perhaps clicking the puzzle pieces together for the reader instead of letting them do it themselves? I there's a puzzle pieces metaphor that I
Hmm.
have worked to absolute death. But I believe it, so I'm just going to keep doing it. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of perhaps and stuff about puzzle pieces.
Carol, how about you?
And I think on the nonfiction side, not that I don't ever ask people to cut, because I'm sure that I do, but especially with picture books, I am constantly asking for sort of explanation and context. Like, hey, can you break this down a little more for our young readers? I talk about our young readers a lot. Not like, for me, the bossy editor wants you to do X. No, it's like, how can we frame this in terms of what do our young readers need to understand? What background might they not already know? And also, can you break this long sentence into 2 shorter sentences, please?
Do either of you use emojis in your like notes? Because I use a lot
No.
of them. I think I in part started using them because so I usually will bring in my assistant for one of the passes, and sometimes we'll do it together. Sometimes I'll pass it. So if we do it together, it's fun for me to see what my assistant's notes are. And I think Rakaya Dawood was my assistant at the time, and I think it was Samira Ahmed's Hollow Fires. And Rakaya was like kind of like narrating in real time as she was reading it, like her reaction. And so she was using emojis and like OMG and fire emojis. And it was very entertaining for me. So I don't know. I just thought, oh, that's fun. So I use emojis more now when I edit. And I'll use the laughing but I'll also do LOL a lot. Chris Colfer once commented that he loved when he would get an LOL from me during the edits.
Oh, that's great. I don't think I've done that like in the Word document. Sometimes in an email, but it very much depends on like who the author is and like what their communication style is.
Right, that's true. You have
Yeah,
to.
I don't think I ever use emojis, but there are definitely a lot of like, and it's not because I'm hostile to them. It's just I've other older than emojis shorthands that I've been using for years, like um, like my goodness. I write my goodness. Like I don't say my goodness very often, but for some reason I like my goodness. When
I'm
something
very
is like
Minnesotan
this
of
is
you,
really
Andrew.
affecting. Like yeah, like what would that sound like if I actually said it? But there are.
My
I
goodness.
definitely have ticks, and
Yes.
I use like a keyboard software that allows me to expand or quickly type repeated phrases with a code, and it will notice when I've typed the same thing over and over again. And said maybe you should shorten this. Like maybe I should actually not say it as often.
Interesting. My goodness. Maybe I'll do OMG sometimes, but I guess that's more for surprise than. So my goodness, it's like, oh, that's effective. That's when you're using it?
Yeah,
Like,
like
okay.
yeah, it's like a wow, this really got me or something like
Mm,
that. Like and I not every author is the same, obviously, but a lot of my authors, the process is I send notes, and the last line in my cover letter is, and I'd love to talk about this on the phone as soon as you've had a chance to look at them. And then like the phone call, like the marginal notes are sort of an appetizer for a phone call. In fact, a lot of the marginal notes say we should talk about this on the phone because I want to
mm.
like freeform
Expand on it.
brainstorm about it and hear what they have to say so I can react to that. So yeah, maybe the most common thing is can't wait to talk about this on the phone. I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. All right. So now we'll end as we always do, which is with sharing with what we're grateful for. And I'll start. I mean, I am grateful for smart, kind, and compassionate people in the children's publishing industry, like the two of you. And I'm really grateful that you came on and helped fill in for Grace while she's away. Carol, what are you grateful for?
Number one, I'm so grateful to be able to eat all of the food again.
Yes.
That has been amazing. And two, just so grateful to my fellow Minnesotans for the way so many people showed up in so many different ways. It was incredibly moving. Going to a memorial where the elementary music teacher led us in a sing-along. I mean, it was so powerful. And I think it's something that is going to stay with me forever.
Andrew, what are you
Yeah.
grateful for?
I mean, I'm not in Minnesota right now, so I'm grateful that I get to go home tomorrow, more than I generally am at the end of the trip because, yeah, I'm grateful that this is my home, has been now my home for half my life. And I'm grateful that I chose well, this community that I get to live in, and that the spirit of neighborliness and intense care is alive and well in at least this part of America. So I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you both. And that was the Minnesota Editors with Carol Hinz and Andrew Karre episode. Thanks to Alex at Pacey Work Studio for editing this podcast. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and tell a friend about it. And tag us on social media using the hashtag BookFriendsForever, or send us a message via Instagram at BookFriendsForever_podcast, or via our website, BookFriendsForever.com. And please join our Patreon. The link is in the show notes. I am Alvina Ling, and you can find me at Alvina Ling on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. Carol, where can people find you?
I'm at Carol Hinz on Blue Sky and InstaChins on Instagram, where I post about books in my stories and post captionless photos of lovely things in my main feed.
Andrew, how about you? Where can people find you?
I'm generally at Andrew Karre everywhere, but the site formerly known as Twitter, where I am non-existent. I use Blue Sky and Instagram predominantly for social posting. I'm on Facebook too, but that's a little more local.
Okay.
I'm technically on Threads, but I don't really use it. Blue Sky for me.
So Blue Sky is the main one. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining and have a great week. And don't forget to read. Bye.